And we are following the closing arguments in a trial out of Iowa. This is against a man accused of killing his girlfriend. Her body is found a couple of weeks after she disappears. She's nearly frozen in this roadside ditch. Ivan Sam Brammer is the defendant, charged with second-degree murder, tampering with a corpse, and theft in the death of Ilene Gowan. She was last seen with the defendant February 13th. Surveillance video obtained from a Burger King shows Gowan kind of awkwardly slumped in the passenger seat of Brammer's truck. Investigators then find Gowan almost 2 weeks later. She's partially frozen. She's in that ditch. She has a purse and a personal safe that, believed to be with her at the time, apparently was missing when they found her. So let's listen to more now of the prosecution's closing argument.
He said he allowed her to stay a couple days. Videos from Sugars corroborate his story. Everything that he said is corroborated. Dropped her off in the morning. She worked her cleaning shift. She was supposed to come back and pick her stuff up. She never did. Mike Brockman worked a full day of work on 2/13. Worked a full day of work on 2/14 as well. Mike Brockman was interviewed by law enforcement. His phone was dumped by law enforcement. And his appointment was verified. His boss, Marcia Delahoy, came in and testified to Mike Brockman working those 2 days. And moreover, she testified that when he would run to go get parts, that he would only be gone to 30, 40 minutes at a time. Mike Brockman had no relationship with Ilene. He was just helping her. Carol Martin is Mike Brockman's landlord. She lives 2.5 miles away from Sugars, out on Railroad Highway. She lives on a small little farm. She's got horse stables there. Mike Brockman rents the bottom space of her house. He has his own entrance in the back, like she testified to. First of all, she had no idea about a black hose in the driveway. There was never a black hose in the driveway. And she also said that when strangers come to her property, her dogs bark. And she was there in the morning on February 13th, 2023. The defendant is saying that he's dropping Ilene off at Mike Brockman's house that morning. This evidence is to the contrary. Sergeant Roberts was the lead investigator in the missing persons case. So this started off as a missing persons. And he was the one that first spoke with the defendant. He was the one that was following up on the report that Nicole had made, my mom is missing. He interviews the defendant on 2/15, which is less than 2 days from when she goes missing. And when he interviews the defendant, there's a portion of that very beginning of that video where the defendant comes in and tries to say that the officer, Sergeant Roberts, said that he was the last person to see her alive.
Sergeant, he talks on the phone. My name's Ted Roberts. I'm a sergeant. I was the last person to see her alive. Well, I didn't say that. Yep. I didn't say that. I said you were the last person that saw her before she went missing.
Last person to see her alive. It's been gone for 2 days. The defendant is saying that because he knows he's already murdered her. No one else is talking about live after 2 days. Use your common sense. We don't think someone's dead after 2 days.
If you could, I just need to know
defendant says when he drops her off at my progress, goes back to his apartment, and then he receives a text from Ilene. A text from Ilene. Ilene is somewhere else. He's at his apartment. We'll come back to that. Sergeant Roberts followed up and realized that this is an echo. He did a second interview. There's something not right. Not trying to corroborate his story, and videos aren't corroborating the story. Detective Dyer, he was part of this interview. Detective Dyer, I don't recall him asking a single question, but he was there. But Detective Dyer came in and testified. Detective Dyer went and picked up the defendant and brought him to the station to do the interview on February 15th, the clip that you just saw. And after the interview was over, Detective Dyer takes the defendant back to Cottonwood, back to his place, where he lives, his apartment. And one thing that Detective Dyer notices that caused attention is that the defendant, when he gets out, he walks directly over to the dumpster and just looks into it and then walks away. When you start looking at some of the other evidence that you've seen in this trial, where you saw the video of the defendant coming back from Trainer, going straight to his apartment on February 13th, arrives around 1 o'clock, gets out his truck, starts taking stuff over to the dumpster, putting stuff in the dumpster. This is 2 days later. The defendant's checking to see if that stuff is still in the dumpster. Detective Ron Brannigan. We had a lot of testimony from Ron Brannigan. He was ended up being the lead detective in this case. What Ron really did is he gave us the timeline. He tracked the defendant's truck, and we learned about the movements of the defendant with Ilene on February 13th. And pretty much through video, through intersection cameras, through private businesses, track the movements for the day, which also tell a different story than what the defendant had told law enforcement 3 different times. What we do know and what you have as evidence is that after leaving Sugars at 8:32 a.m. with Ilene, and we have an exhibit where Ilene's in the truck and you can see her at 8:32 a.m. Law enforcement tracked the defendant's truck movements, and we know at approximately 9:28 a.m., instead of the defendant's vehicle going up to Mike Brocklin's house, what we know is that after Dudley Courts, that this vehicle is heading towards Omaha. And this is at 9:28. So the vehicle's going westbound. And there's a gap there. There's about a 58-minute gap where we don't know. We don't know exactly. We don't have any surveillance. So we don't know exactly where he's at in the vehicle. But we know Ilene's with him when he's going that direction. And we also know that from Dudley Court's videos, you see her walking through in the entrance up to her mom's apartment, down the hallway, back down the hallway again, and out of the building, and was alive and was walking just fine. You saw that with your own eyes in the video. And she was carrying a black safe. What we also know, and what you saw as evidence, is you saw the defendant's vehicle come back into Council Bluffs at 10:26 a.m. And we had some images where it appears it's Ilene in the passenger side, but those images were hard to get a lot of detail from, but you could tell that someone's in there. And what we also know is that at 10:30 a.m., the defendant goes through Burger King drive-thru. And you have a video of that. And you've seen the video. And we have a couple photos that are in evidence as well, and you can see that as well. And through the entire video, it's not a long clip, but it's long enough to see the defendant exchanging money with the individual working for Burger King. But when you focus on Ilene, she doesn't move. Not at all. And the only thing you can see moving in that video is two things. Defendant moving his arm out to exchange with the teller at the window, but you can see his chest and his body pounding through his chest. You can see it in the video. He has already assaulted her. He doesn't know what to do with her. And then, of course, we've got the defendant eastbound heading out to Trainer, 14 miles away from Council Bluffs. And we know he's out there because we have video of it. Have him going out and have him coming back. Never in any of the stories to law enforcement going to Trainer. Not once. In fact, when he's confronted about it, didn't have an explanation for it. His story was conforming as law enforcement confronted the defendant about some of the other surveillance footages and knowing his location. His story kind of changes to conform with it. Like, for instance, I wasn't in Omaha. Well, we have you in Omaha. Okay, well, yeah, maybe I was in Omaha. 4 aces getting cigarettes. The story conforms. When asked about Trainer, there was nothing. And then, of course, he comes back to Cottonwood Apartments around 1 p.m. and he pulls into his normal parking spot, and we have a pretty lengthy video of the defendant dumping items into the dumpster and then just in his...
Thinking about and watching the closing arguments in the Sam Brammer case out of Iowa. This is a case in which he's accused of killing his on and off again girlfriend, Ilene Gowan. Joining me today to talk about this case and the other items on the agenda here, Matty Mangino is with us. He is an attorney in Pennsylvania. And Katherine Lizardo. She is in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, also a trial attorney there. So welcome, guys. Always good to have you along. This was a rapid case in terms of beginning, middle, and now at the end. So let me start with you, Katherine. Very circumstantial case. You've got one of those volatile relationships, on and off again, alcohol fueled, it seems. How do you think it's looking for the prosecution now as they are about to wrap up their closing?
I think it's going well for the prosecution based on the closing too. I like this prosecutor's style in terms of very conversational with the jury. There is a lot of PowerPoints though with a lot of letters there. So it doesn't look that great in terms of the distraction with the jury there. But overall, I like how he's doing it. And also the circumstantial evidence against the defendant is not going well. Like you mentioned, he created or made 3 statements to the police, and each of them were changing as time went on. That did not match with the circumstantial evidence.
And sorry, I pocket dialed you there just while you were.
Sorry.
Yeah, you know, it's always you know, the smart defendant, Matt, that gets in trouble, and you know, you start digging that hole, and you know, it just seems to get worse and worse. And everything we've seen presented to this jury makes it look like this guy just lies a lot or has a very large imagination. But does that make him a killer?
Well, you know, the thing is, Michael, you know, this prosecutor, you know, Paul Forney, has a lot of material to work with. And it's always great when you're making a closing argument, you have a lot of, evidence to deal with. So number one, as you said earlier, I mean, it's never a good idea for a defendant to talk with the police without an attorney or to talk to the police at all. But this guy talked to them 4 times, I think. And each time it was a little bit different. I mean, that's great if you're presenting a case on behalf of the state. They also have the video surveillance. You know, there's so much here that the prosecution has to work with, even though this is, in fact, a circumstantial case, that you have to be very methodical, very plain-spoken, make sure that the jurors are following along with what you have to say. But don't talk too long. Don't bore them. You have a lot of good information. Hit them with it and get out of there.
Yeah. Well, let's go back into court. You teed that up perfectly, Matt. Let's go back into court here because the closing argument of the prosecution seems to be winding down. He's given them a lot to chew on. Let's go back in.
The truck. You got to see video of the truck. And you got to see a vehicle that appeared to be running just fine. Didn't see any smoke coming out of it. In fact, the vehicle was running well enough that law enforcement didn't even keep up with it. Come back to that. Sergeant James Doty. Sergeant James Doty testified that reported to be $1,200 in Eileen's black safe. He also interviewed the defendant, and the defendant admitted that there was between $600 and $700 in the safe. Sergeant Doty also followed up on the bank deposit. And 2 days after her disappearance, a $1,200 cash deposit went into his bank. You saw the video. You saw the evidence of it. There's a deposit slip for it. $215, $1,200. Defendant told law enforcement that he sold some tools on Facebook Marketplace. You already heard from Justin. He didn't sell any tools for his father on Facebook. He didn't sell any tools for his father and give him any money. Going back to the truck, Sergeant Doty also verified that the truck was in fact crushed. Lakeside Recycling. Interestingly enough, when the defendant was arrested on February 24th, law enforcement, they did a little walk around his truck just to see if there was anything damaged in the truck. The officer testified they didn't go get DNA, they didn't try to find any blood or anything. They were just looking to see if there was some kind of altercation in the truck. Appeared to be normal, they didn't do anything else with it. Defendant gets arrested, goes to jail, bonds out the next day, and what does he do? He goes and crushes his truck. A truck that appeared to be running fine in the video that you saw, and he crushed it for $750. Remember how I said use common sense? $750 he crushes his truck. And wants to make sure that the truck is crushed. Sergeant Doty also, as he arrived on the scene when law enforcement found the body, or when law enforcement came to the scene, the body was found on February 26th. Sergeant Doty was also the one that was able to verify that those are the clothes that this body appeared to be the same clothes as Ilene when she went missing on February 13, 2023. So he was able to connect the missing persons case to the deceased body that was laying in a ditch 2 weeks later out at 152nd and Old Norman Bridge. Zach Norman, Deputy Zach Norman, he was first on the scene, and he secured the scene. He's the one that called Sergeant Doty, and he testified as to his observations of the body, and his observation was there was some kind of ligature mark on her neck. CSI Hadley Cava, she came out and took pictures of the deceased body. She also took pictures of the area, and this was in fact an area where a lot of people do dump their trash. It's a remote location. You heard testimony from Special Agent Nathan Houck. He was the FBI individual that presented the cast report. And there was a lot of information on that, a lot of technical information. But what we can distill from it is that both phones were together on February 13th. They were traveling together as well. And we would expect to see that in the morning, because we know from the evidence that the defendant is traveling. We know the defendant picks up Ilene, and they're traveling together. And we know his direction at this point, so we expect to see the phones at that point. But what we also learn is that the phones are together and traveling together when they're not supposed to be together. Remember the evidence. The defendant says he dropped her off at Mike Brockman's. He goes to his apartment. At some point, she texts him. Why are the phones together the entire time? Because he has her phone, and they're traveling together. And this evidence shows that. Interestingly enough, both phones go off network at the same time when they go to Trainer. So her phone is with his phone when they go to Trainer, which is 14 miles away from Council Bluffs. And they're both, coincidentally, not able to communicate with the cell tower. Special Agent House said, well, all I do is deal with phone records. All I can say is that maybe they're roaming. Maybe it's airplane mode. Or maybe the phones are shut off manually. Detective Clark came in. He has different information. He doesn't have phone records, but he has the phone dump, the phone itself, the details from the phone. Because we got the phone information. And he did an extraction on that phone. And what we learned from his testimony is that when they're in Trainer, his phone is manually shut off and manually turned back on at the exact same times that the cast report show that them going off the network in the cast report. So now we know the answer for the defendant's phone. We don't have Eileen's phone. We don't have Eileen's phone. We're able to get her records from the provider, but we don't have her phone. But we have the defendant's phone, so we know at least the defendant's phone was manually shut off during that period that he went into trainer and then came back through trainer. Dr. Kelly Cruz.
And once again, prosecution focusing on the important expert testimony, in this case against Sam Brammer. We're going to come back and continue our coverage on that case. Quick note, programming note, some interesting news out of the Alec Murdaugh case, a plea deal. We're going to talk about that as well. Stay where you are. Coming right back.